Hi, welcome back to I Studio. I'm so happy to be back in the studio on this day after Christmas. Um, I walked in and I was kind of thrilled with what I'm seeing, the progress with this particular painting, or really I should say three paintings, because I do want to make them three separate paintings that work well together. And they had gotten off to a great start. Sometimes that's worse than struggling to find your composition. When the composition finds itself too quickly, the quality of paint just isn't up to par. So you have to risk it and make changes, which I've been doing. And just kind of loving what's happening, the quality of the paint and the movement of the painting that's going on so far. So I wanted to give you the full overview of what's happening. I want to talk. A lot of people ask me, how do you know what to do next? And honestly, that's a pretty intuitive process. You have to really look at the painting. Ask the painting, what is it that you need? What move should I make? And there are a million choices. There isn't really a right or a wrong choice. Every choice is going to send you in a different direction, on a different path. And it's always an adventure to be on these different paths. It's my way of traveling when I'm here in the studio. I'm going everywhere in the universe, and it's pretty incredible. I don't want to limit myself to where I've been before. So I walked in and I asked my painting, what do you want to be? And I am seeing the relationship between these two red areas here. And I thought it might be nice to add another flower here. So back to the stencils. And that's really kind of funny. I work with stencils a lot for many reasons. I love the marks they make. I love being able to put my energy into the marks, but the stencil kind of contains that energy, but they're still energetic marks, which I like. I'm such a one-trick pony. I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but I had this stencil made, and I thought it was a brand new stencil. And it turns out that I had used the same photograph of a spider chrysanthemum that I had used for a previous stencil. And so I just got a duplicate of my original stencil. The thing about stencils and the way that they can be used is, in the end, they don't look like the stencil. Parts of the stencil may be visible. Sometimes you can even choose to really allow it to look like a stencil, the stencil that you're using. But many times, like in this area here, I've gone over it with a couple of different stencils in different colors, then I've sanded. So I have a series of marks. They may have the characteristic of a stencil, but they don't look like my original stencil, which you could see over here. This is the original stencil. Will it stay that way? It might. And the reason that it might is because, remember, I started these panels without gessoing them. I prepared the surface with polymer medium gloss, and the beige that you see is actually the wood grain. And I find that is pretty interesting. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take a smaller version of the same stencil, spider chrysanthemum. I think it's the same or very similar chrysanthemum. And I'm going to put it in this red area. So my first thought was I was going to put a red flower there. And I started looking at my reds, and thought, when I look at the overall scheme, I've got these black flowers primarily. This one is getting some red on it, and maybe they all will shift tones as I layer the stencils with other colors. But I went through my paints and I wound up choosing, it's called Scotch Blue Farrow and Ball, a beautiful blue, almost a purplish. I was going to do black and I found this beautiful blue. So let's try this and see what we get. Normally I love to put the panel on the table and do it while it's lying flat. These are so doggone heavy that either I have to struggle with devices of, put it on the ground, lift off the bottom, slide it on the table. I mean, I figure out ways to get it done. But because this is a small area, I think I'll just do it up on the wall and see how that turns out. Okay. Color is a little lighter than I had anticipated. Now, if I want to make it darker, of course I can go over it with a darker color. You also don't have to do the entire stencil. You may choose to just do a section of the stencil. That's up to you. Every decision you make is going to give you a different effect. So when people think that stencils are cheating, it's a laugh. I was watching a very interesting sort of a documentary on Banksy on YouTube. And they talked about Banksy introducing the stencil into graffiti art. And what they said was so interesting to me. They said the stencil was a very low-tech way of painting, a very complex message. In Banksy's case, a very complex message with a very low-tech way of doing it with a stencil. Whereas some of the other graffiti artists, they had these beautiful virtuoso painting styles, but the message wasn't quite as profound as Banksy's were. So I love that idea of a very low-tech delivery, and I do love the stencil. Okay, so what's the verdict? I got a phone call while I was filming, so I had to excuse myself, and while I was talking on the phone with a dear friend of mine, I scraped into this flower and came up. I had an opportunity to really sit back and look at what I had done, and I came up with the conclusion there's a couple of things that aren't working. It's too small, and it is directly across from this flower. It should be up here. So this flower is interesting. It's a black flower that's been covered with white and then sanded, and you can see the black coming through. So I decided while I was on the phone call with my friend that I'll put a big white flower here, and then I'll let that dry, and I'll come back, go back over it with grays or reds or black or whatever color I want to go over with it, and I'll sand through the darker color and the white flower will come through. So this is just the thinking process in how do we wind up with what we wind up with. So I'm going to demo that, and then I'm going to probably call it a day in the studio. Bringing out the big stencil. Going a little higher. So they're nicely triangulating, like your kitchen. You know, you want your stove, your sink, and your refrigerator to triangulate. I want my flowers to triangulate. And I need a little stand. It's a little rolling cart to set my paint on. And let's give it a go. You notice if I place something inappropriately, I just go over it, and what's underneath is just going to make it all that much better. The purple that I did earlier will wind up showing up somehow in the new composition and making it stronger. If I want to make a flower that later I'm going to cover with a different contrasting color, and I'm going to sand into it so the bottom color shows through, I'm going to have to make it fairly thick. I'm jumping the gap of the painting here. So part of the flower is going to be on this side. Let's take that right to the edge. All right, gives me a little something to work with. It certainly isn't a resolution at this time, but this panel hasn't been worked as much as the other two have. So I'm working into this one, building up the paint quality, and then I'll probably, go back through and see if I need to bring the paint quality up some more in the other panels. Drop my paintbrush in the water so it doesn't harden up, and just plop the lid on my white so I don't throw it out. So that's it for my journey today. I hope you enjoyed my processes. As usual, I just like to take you along on my journey of discovery and trying to create an interesting painting. I know it's been hard to get into the studio with all the Christmas activities, and I haven't had like a huge day in the studio. I've just been doing little things here and there. And remember, if you create a crack of an hour, if you create a crack of 30 minutes, pretty soon that time starts expanding. And if it's consistent, if you're consistently coming in and doing 30 minutes or an hour, pretty soon you'll be consistently coming in and doing 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Time seems to expand when you create a crack of time and open it up. So please don't be hard on yourself. You don't have to set a whole day aside, just a little bit of time, and it'll happen. And I always tell you, Rome wasn't built in a day. We cannot solve a painting in an afternoon. I don't want to solve a painting in an afternoon. I'm just going to keep working on it. One thing leads to another, to another, to another. And what winds up happening is I'll get an idea. It will fail so completely that it'll send me in a new direction. And that's where the magic happens. With the failures is where the magic happens. So allow those failures to guide you, to change your trajectory, to change what you thought you were doing. Let that happen. And that's where you're going to grow and the paintings are going to evolve. All right, so have a wonderful New Year's. Let's hope that 2023 is a wonderful year for everyone, for all. and I wish you all the best. Painting is a practice. Practice makes perfect.